Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exclusive Boom Room interview. This is Sasha with Arcanum Ventures. I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Carmelo, and today we are speaking with Matt Sorg, the Vice President of Technology at Solana Foundation. He comes from a background in economics, data science, artificial intelligence, and technology in general. He's held a number of key positions in leadership roles across startups and well-known companies such as Riot Games and Unity. And now, today, he's here, part of the blockchain revolution, and here to speak with us about Solana. Matt, thanks so much for coming on board. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you. And I think, I'm not sure if you're familiar with our interview process at all, but we start these interviews in the most boring and consistent way possible. And we ask the same question every time to kick it off. Tell us about Matt Sorg. What is your background? What's your interest in Web3, blockchain, and crypto? And how did you get here today in your journey to the Solana Foundation?
Yeah, I've kind of always been on the forefront. So it actually started way back when I was just getting in grad school. I was in grad school for economics, and I quickly saw that instead of econometrics and these kind of inference models, that machine learning was kind of be the next thing. So I just gravitated more and more and more towards that, and then went into industry as opposed to going into academia. And I went to Riot Games, learned a lot, and some colleagues from there. We actually Riot itself, is a big, like semi slow moving, just product games. But the people there are pretty, uh, you know, really forward thinking. And we started a blockchain games startup together at the time. Epic Games, Steam, even Facebook and Discord were releasing game launchers. So we wanted to kind of compete with that. And the idea was buy once, play anywhere, and the database that you could read from to see where your ownership was Ethereum. So this big database that everybody trusted, and it actually did pretty well. I came to the conclusion that by that point, this is about 2017, that 2018, that blockchains weren't necessarily ready for consumer applications. Like we were selling $20 to $40 box sales for game access. So went back. I had another startup that's doing quite well. It's called Contra Labs. It's a hearing aid startup, direct to consumer. So nothing to do with blockchain. It's more about around the AI sphere. And then uh, got contacted with Raj and Toli about a little over 4 years ago now, and kind of just started just kind of talking to them about an application strategy. That the main net was only, I think, 8 or 9 months old when I first started talking to them. And they didn't even really have a lot of pieces in place for consumer apps. And so I was like, well, my app died because the chain wasn't ready for consumer apps. So let's talk. I kind of know what a chain needs. And I did at the time. I was also exploring a bunch of other chains, and because I was thinking about building on one, and then I just saw that Solana was just so far and away where I would build that maybe I should just join them directly and kind of, instead of building one company, kind of fractionalize my input to a ton, which was kind of my personal original thesis was, helping an entire ecosystem, kind of the network effects that could be possible on a shared state like Solana. Yeah, so that's why, yeah, it's been kind of a windy road in there, and then I'm sure we'll talk about some of it during the course of this interview. It's been a never dull moment in crypto, and especially Solana ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, there's so much happening within this industry, but especially Solana. And it is interesting that you mentioned, you had this kind of drive to work more so for an ecosystem. And I think that's way more exciting perspective in this industry than working for an individual company or an individual product or a startup, because you get exposure to many different types of problems. Carmelo and I, we kind of joke and how when we advise startups and we also invest in startups, we get exposure to a lot of different companies' problems, and we in essence become like startup ninjas, right? Yeah. But in your case, that's maybe compounded because you have to take such a high level viewpoint of what is a common technological challenge for all these companies that are speaking with us or coming to us or considering building on our network, and how are we going to move this forward. And I did want to kind of, dive deeper. And I'm sure Carmelo's got a million questions around tech and product, and also maybe comparing in a competitive landscape. But I did want to ask as well, in in a very competitive landscape like blockchain, where we have some of these major players like Solana, Ethereum, etc. It's kind of similar to like working in another industry like pharmaceutical or like oil
Mhm.
field or agriculture, where like you do need to drink the Kool-Aid a little bit. So I was curious, like after your time in Solana, or even leading up to your time in Solana, like what drew you to this company and what hooked you really? Because there are so many other players in this space right now.
Yeah, it was very practical. It's just where, with the few ideas that I had, I actually still have them. Some of them I think are still pretty good. Um, it was just the place I would build it, which is very practical. So there's no like, I mean, there's some things that, I mean, totally is great to work with. There's some, but that practical mindset that I had, also I could see in the ecosystem, because and it's more about, can we find, as an ecosystem, the applications and products that get product market fit, but that actually make use of the blockchain piece, that aren't based on some temporary speculation or thing, but are actually just better than their, blockchain is the best infrastructure for it. And you're allowed to have this new design space because of, blockchain. And yeah, and I just, and you see that you bear that it's starting to bear out in the last, year and a half, that certain types of network effects that you can create. It's in kind of mostly in meme coins, which, you know, uh, you know, are very wildly priced, but don't really have any intrinsic value. But you could easily kind of replace that with some other types of assets that do have, backing and redemptive value, or even like services or whatever it might be, securities. But yeah, so that's kind of like the original ethos. Is it's like, this is where I can do this set of things. It's really hard for me to do those other places.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask too, like, what was your time like with those gaming companies like Unity and Riot Games, and did that help also lead you to Solana because they've obviously got a pretty big gamer vision, gamer approach, gaming community, and it was sort of positioning itself. I don't know if it's still the case, but as like the gaming blockchain last cycle, is that still the approach as well?
I think the desire, like, so there's, okay, one, Solana is a very diverse ecosystem. You have different people to kind of tell you
Yeah.
different things, which is what but I actually think is the goal, is that we have a diverse economy. We are a internet city state kind of thing. And we want to have the most diverse, robust, like functional economy there is. And so yeah, so we are the deep end chain, we are the meme coin chain, we are the payments chain, we are the, whatever, ever else, RWA chain, like Biddle just came on onto Solana. So it's really a name a industry. We want to have them kind of interact and have network effects. I think being in completely digital economies for so long, they were very much like one way, or that they weren't network effect economies. They were kind of like just, user to company. I saw a lot of problems in that, and even just like internally, just, game launchers across Riot Games weren't all unified, because in some regions China controlled their section, Garena controlled the section in Southeast Asia. So even as a, data scientist, machine learning engineer, I didn't have access to some of that data. I would have to ask them or whatever. And got even worse when you got into esports, because those were like MLG and completely other organizations. And so I was trying to figure out ways to do payments, and MLG would sometimes just not pay people. And so you'd have these transparency issues when we would help host this thing with this other company, and then they wouldn't pay. And, they'd have trouble paying other companies or whatever, that were international. Maybe some countries' payment systems, it was kind of hard to do payouts to those players. And so more and more, I just ran into more and more the problems that blockchain might fix. Um, and yeah, and I started just seeing that it was the infrastructure was just better in some ways than the other ones. Again, it was very practical that I ran into some of these issues.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And in blockchain, we see this. Everybody wants to retroactively like jam solutions back into problems that don't exist. But were there any specific gaming problems that you saw in your time with those companies that you thought
So
blockchain could immediately like help resolve?
um, the main one was around you just like accepting international payments. That was like the most acute one. Even at Riot, there was a time where we almost had to stop accepting payments from Brazil, which is a huge problem, because it was actually at the time was our biggest growing region. There was just so much chargeback that Visa almost stopped carrying us. But if we had like a crypto option, or especially if it was developed to the point where it is today, where on-ramp off-ramps are pretty easy, not only would you just not have to worry about chargeback risk, you also would potentially not have, you wouldn't have to give the 2% plus whatever to the credit card companies to serve that business model. So it's yeah. So a lot of the international payment stuff I thought was just like the low hanging fruit for games. And then on top of that, there is, when you have an asset is completely digital, then and you're certifying it, you can have those controls and then let your community run with it. So that the idea that I had originally, so Riot has one of the best APIs of big games, and out of that comes Blitz.gg, OP.gg, all these like really, really big, I'll call them fan sites, but they're very much professional. They evolved from like usually some small number of people just making match histories or guides or something, and then they've evolved to these really, really quite big businesses. Like there was a time there where people thought that Blitz might actually be valued more than like a lot of other games out there. So yeah, so I think that idea where you take Riot just made an API. What if you put things on blockchain, and then not only is it an API, but actually you give your users write access? So instead of them making just like a match history thing, maybe they can start making, other infrastructure around your game for you, like events and tournaments and, and reputation and stuff, and then have people be able to actually do monetization with that. I thought that was like a really interesting design space. Now, obviously, a lot of that stuff hasn't quite hit yet for a variety of reasons, but yeah, that was kind of like my initial, beyond just payments, my initial like users stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and obviously Riot Games like created League of Legends, and that's spawned off of a game that already exists. So it's kind of like
Yeah.
perfect use case for user generated content, and how you can allow people to create games and monetize them and become their kind of small indie development shops or studios, whatever you want to call it. So that's one of our favorite use cases for blockchain as well, and kind of that open transparency for game building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny because we work a lot on game economies as well, and it's interesting you said that, because there are some fantastic use cases to what you could do with a decentralized cryptocurrency. In theory, in practice as well, like in some cases, but the traction is difficult. And I think around GameFi, like it's maybe off the grid, and Gunzilla have been making some progress and trying to shift the perception around Web3 gaming, but it's very slow. You did say something very interesting around the perception of Solana and how it's kind of like this multi-industry, multi-application chain. And I've been dying to ask this question for a while now to someone in the Solana Foundation. But like when you think about Solana as a DePIN chain, which it has actively been marketed as a DePIN chain, you're up against some big players in the form of Peak and IoTex. And when it comes to gaming, Scale's been making incredible progress, and RWA's Plume is they're hitting on all cylinders when it comes to BD and partnerships. And so it is a very competitive landscape. But the thing that's been really interesting about Solana that I think maybe the Solana Foundation hasn't spoken so much about is the sort of network effect strategy that you've spoken about, and the idea of Solana that became a front runner as a meme coin network. Because it's interesting when you talk to a lot of startup founders and builders and you ask them what are the criteria for choosing different blockchain networks, they talk about, I want to go to where the users are, which is where the liquidity is, which is where the builders are going to be. And it's funny because this resulted in some other L1s, L2s launching, let's say backroom meme coin strategies to try and onboard more traders and speculators. But I just wanted to hear from you, like, what's your opinion on a high level on what happened with Solana as with the meme coin activity, and how has that translated into, let's say, more enterprise-based applications or onboarding of these applications?
Yeah, I think at the core level, we want to help businesses solve problems that they have. And that's through technology, but it's also ecosystem side. Like you kind of need some help on both. But our approach isn't much like BD deals for some user, company acquisition and, stuff. Like we do that some, like that's kind of the game you kind of do, but we don't think of ourselves as a publisher. We are a tech company tech organization that facilitates a bunch of other technical organizations. And so we're not like directly responsible for like retail, and we are here. We've seen a lot of things, obviously, so we can help. But in some ways, like there's a saying that I heard the other day that I think is really good, because we're kind of this like base for setting up for success. We didn't choose meme coins. Meme coins chose Solana. So and basically what that's meaning is like we didn't go out and have some like meme coin strategy where we're going to acquire a bunch of meme coins and like try to get pudgy or whatever. Like we try to be the best place so that they would have like a lot of liquidity and interaction effects, and so network effects with other things. And the thing that's actually happening is liquidity begets liquidity, like you say, and the platform has shown itself to be ready. I think even in the like over a year, I think only during the Melania launch, there was a few parts of the infrastructure that faltered a little bit, but other than that, and that wasn't the chain itself. It was like some other layers of the stack. I'm happy to get into it, but other than that, like even the infrastructure is largely held up. Like, and so the user experience has been great. And so why would users leave? All the action is here, and the goal is to just diversify that more and more, especially like now when there's like times of volatility. Maybe instead of meme coins, a user might want to go into a structured project by Biddle, and then you just have this. That's where you start getting more and more interesting network effects, and you're already seeing that today with different types of industries. And there's this thought like as things go, you just got to go from base principles. The people who are having fun with meme coins are still going to do that, but you have these businesses that are just starting to get product market fit, especially in DeepIn, that they're just going to have fundamentals around them that are good enough that you just naturally trade or do whatever you want as a user to interact with them.
Yeah, I think I saw last year there was like 10,000 new meme coins launching a day. I assume they were mostly meme coins on Solana, and now I can't imagine what that number is. It's got to be much higher. But has this sort of like unofficially served as a stress test for Solana chain itself? Like it wasn't the intention, but maybe it's like Sasha said, it's helping showcase the potential of Solana's chain and what it can do for enterprise adopters, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there was a period of congestion. Probably, it actually started probably around like early April last year, and it was actually it wasn't anything like the on-chain code. It wasn't the protocol. It was the ingress layer, the communication stack. So Quick is made by Google. So it's just open source like protocol basically, but the implementation that we were using was like Google engineers and other open source engineers just wasn't performed enough, and so it's kind of interesting that we helped them, like that library actually improved and made some augmentations for it for Solana specific stuff. So it's it's been a great stress test, basically. Yes, like and that's why a lot of these other industries are coming on now. That they just like kind of back to the original. Like, I'm like my user story. I am a app developer, and I just want to go the best place where I have a vision for my app. I want to go to the place where I know it can execute. Like Solana has just showed itself to be that in a variety of different things. It handled the biggest on-chain day in like the Trump launch that Friday, and then that subsequent Saturday. There was no hitches that day. And it was I think we almost got above 10% of NASDAQ volume in a day, on an average day. So it's, and it handled it just fine.
It's wild.
And yeah, exactly. It was but when I say it's the biggest trading day in blockchain history, like it's not really even close. I think it's even like almost an order of magnitude above. And so you can hear these. Well, by the way, you can hear these stats like now, like, oh, Solana's dropped 90% from its top. I'm like, yeah, it dropped 90% from like the literal president of the United States dropping a meme coin. Like the chain actually, the weird thing is like, obviously like there's so much going on macro or whatever, but the chain, like even meme coins, like the 3 billion volume a day, that puts us back to like around inauguration day levels. Like it's not like we're into some ghost chain mode. Like the blocks are like humming along. Like there's so much DEX activity. It's not like peak bull market hysteria, but it's leveled off. And this has been the case for about, people would have thought it kind of died probably like early Feb, but this is obviously we're already in April, and it's continued to be like very, very stable. What I think this is something like kind of like related to what we're talking about, where like applications, if you're not, the application itself in this case is a speculative application. So we'll see. Like it could obviously go whatever way. It's probably more volatile than just like international payments for like you know, your business payments or something like that. But these are users that seem to just like the product, and so they are way stickier than I think crypto people are realizing. They just assume it's just going to die. But like this seems to be just a product that people like to do. They like to gamble on which, you know, meme fart coin, dog coin, whatever is going to just like moon that day. And you know, I think it's going to have to evolve if it's going to like stay there, just like almost like anything in this space. But but if it does, I think it actually is a little bit more sustainable than like say NFTs were, that were very illiquid or that required like specific types of teams. And yeah, so that's just like my spiel there. But I think to answer the original question, like all of this activity and then now sustained activity has shown like how Solana performs in these peaks and troughs, and there's been just so many improvements. It's hard to really describe the enormity of how much better Solana is today than like a year ago, than 2 years ago. And then
Yeah.
there's even more, it's been like an exponential improvement. So I think there's this thing that you often see on Twitter, like this architecture versus that architecture. And, you know, if you are like the bag holder of one, you assume the best case of like the 7-year roadmap or whatever. And then, but on Solana, then they just assume that the other one is just like, that's the end, they're at their end state. But Solana is just as like there's so much room to run and progress, yeah, I'd say we're like 2% done and we're probably never done, you know. And so there's like even this year we're probably going to at least double block space, and have a bunch of like, we can get into it, but like asynchronous block production and do a bunch of stuff with like the costing of the network that is like way more friendly to users, and like have a whole second client launch within the next, you know, year or two. So it's like really fast paced environment with a lot of development.
Yeah, I definitely want to ask you later on about that 98% and where Solana's going next. But
Yeah.
you brought up a good point. Like Sasha and I think I remember like the last few years we've heard a lot of people clowning on Twitter about Solana, like, oh, it goes down all the time and everything, but it hasn't gone down since February 2024, I believe. And then
Yeah.
before that, it was a year before that. So it's actually been like really consistent. And
Yep.
I wanted to ask, like, my technical knowledge obviously doesn't hold a candle to yours, but I wanted to ask in the layman's terms, like what happened to cause that, and what lessons have been learned and applied since then to, I mean, aside from the stress testing from meme coins, apparently.
Yeah. So the reason why I would go down, Solana's really trying to push the needle on performance, and you make some design decisions that are just a little bit harder to execute than you know, Ethereum or something with like, you know, you have a mempool that you can choose to grab from, and so you're like less worried about spam. And then, you know, you have this very, very drastic pricing curve that will discourage any sort of spam just because it's prohibitively expensive at some point. Yeah. So like there's a few design decisions that other communities make that really constrain how much you're trying to ingress. Whereas Solana, we're trying to get to the point where we can ingress at line rate. And then our load balancing will actually happen because of layers on top of it that are like almost like decentralized gateways. But we can get into that later. But the main thing is like Solana is trying to keep the ecosystem, like where we're all very aligned with this, like IBRL, increased bandwidth, reduced latency. Like that's like the central ethos. So really just keeping fees low, trying to handle all of this stuff, you know, give me all you got, and then try to handle it. And, you know, if you do that and you discover points where in practice, like your system isn't able to handle it. And there's a couple of different, and we know that we were doing this, that we were trying to push the needle on performance. And so instead of there being inactivity leak or these other safeguards that other ecosystems would have, if like a few validators went down, we just chose to do the safest thing possible and just have in the code, to be clear, there's no off switch, there's no whatever. It's just like the code. If other validators weren't like, if I have a validator, which is, you know, there's thousands of them, and I don't hear 66% of stake saying yes on stuff, then you just choose to not participate anymore, and that can result in a state where there's just isn't block production. There's no like off switch or anything though. It's just the in protocol that it's very conservative on how the individual block producers choose to do blocks. They don't, what other ecosystems would say in that moment, like, oh, you're not getting 66%. Let's lower the threshold over time to the point where we get it. So 50% of stake is still voting on the network. Eventually it'll get down there. That's what other, and so then you kickstart and go back. But in the code, we just don't have that. That's it. So there's no off switch. There's no like fundamental, but this is a design decision to be safe while you're also pushing the needle on performance. Because the worst thing that could happen is if there was some like confirmed block that somebody made a financial decision based off of that was then invalidated because it didn't actually get the appropriate level of, as an activity leak goes down, we're just kind of worried that there's some level of airspace that could happen there. So we'd rather just halt being able to have, social and like real conversations with real people and then bring up the chain again. So in doing that, we discovered, because we were willing to do that actual like live. Oh, the other thing that's really important to note, it's like any network, except for I don't want to talk shit, but most networks have a test net that can take functional or whatever, and but that it's really hard actually to totally mimic what the live environment is, because partly just because it's like costly, but also just there's so many different organizations. Like, how do we know exactly like all the eight popular RPC providers infrastructure that are hitting the network in a certain way, and all the like individual applications that have their own routing, and then all the network topology and setups of the individual validators that have their slight augmentations? Like, it's really actually basically impossible to simulate exactly a live environment. And so being like actually getting ingress and a huge amount of traffic live has just been incredibly helpful for us to inform, oh, we can increase block space. This is what we have to do to do that. This is where bottlenecks are or whatever in practice. And thankfully, a lot of the validators will give us some of their data from their blocks. Like, we don't get it directly. They have to opt into it, then they send it to us. And so that's been really helpful too. So you have like this live view of all these like just really helpful information.
It is reassuring to hear that you guys are pushing the needle on this, and I think maybe it's unfair that some people are misinterpreting that you guys are in constant development and you are looking to improve various aspects of the network. And I do have a confession to make. I think it was a few months ago. I was clowning Solana on a Telegram chat. Someone was talking about like the pros and cons of building on whatever networks, and I said, without even knowing or thinking very much, because I hadn't heard any recent news from the foundation or in general around like recent developments. And I said, oh, Solana's not really moving too fast. Like, you see updates coming from Ethereum Foundation all the time. But after I said that, I realized I don't even know what I'm talking about. And I started doing a little bit more research. And so one of the things I think people don't talk enough about is some of the unique technological aspects of Solana that make it different from some of the other networks. Yeah. And I know that you guys have been developing some really cool things more recently in sea level, for example, which from my understanding kind of is a game changer for throughput. It turns Solana into a sort of multi-thread virtual machine. I know we've got proof of history, which isn't really tied up with a consensus mechanism, but it enables, sub-second block times, which is amazing for like high frequency trading. And then we've also got Blinks, which is a huge game changer when it comes to count abstraction. And so the cool thing that we like to do, because we're especially working in the VC space, is like, we don't pay so much attention to the tech, but more so in the impact, because the end result is everything, really. So I wanted to hear from your end more on the tech aspect. What are some of the advancements within the foundation of the network that you're super excited about, simply from, let's say, an impact perspective on existing industries or Web3 industry or whatever that might affect your life or other people's day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I'll first start going back to kind of the genesis of why Solana existed. Yeah, there was Totally wrote this, Anatoly Yankovenko, for the founder of, like, the technical founder of Solana. He wrote an article that was the 8 core innovations, which I don't need to go through all of them, but you mentioned some of them. But the idea was just to rewrite what a blockchain was from like a systems engineering network point of view, and not necessarily just, a lot of the other initial blockchains were very much like constrained block space. Like, what if we do this and just, yeah. So, but this is like how do we, from, a lot of these were like firmware, cell phone, other like distributed systems engineers, how do we scale this as much as possible? And the idea is, if you want this to be, the blockchains are really about like collaborative platforms in the end of the day, where everybody's kind of agreeing on similar state changes and stuff. And yeah, so like the idea of this was, yeah, rewrite the whole thing. You mentioned some of them. It's parallel execution, so you actually make use of hardware. The yeah, I think you said it pretty well. Proof of history is really there. It's before consensus, but it's there to let all the validators know when it's their time and who's going up next. And if there is a validator who may be offline or not producing blocks, to skip them, and like the network knows to skip them. So you can have this like very nice leader schedule with very minimal disruption between them, because you know exactly when it's your turn, because there's just a certain number of ticks that you're waiting for. So it's like, and it's really hard to do that without some other system to do that, or you just have to like wait for a block to be done, have some round of figuring out the next validator or something. Proof of work does it by, you just wait for somebody to solve the algorithm or whatever, and that can make it so the blocks of varying times. Because sometimes, I think there's actually even a time a few months ago where it took quite some time. I think it was like a couple hours before somebody actually solved the algorithm. It's just a probability thing. And so in order to get it really, really tight and really, really consistent for businesses to execute like really high performance applications, you just need these types of properties. And then so that's the way it started, which is just like these fundamental principles of, but the other thing is that it's very practical. Like, it's very iterative. Get something out there, test it, listen to your users, like what are they seeing in practice, and then just like keep on serving them, like a very like product focused mentality of the platform itself. And so that's part of the reason why I think we haven't really had this like perception as things have been moving fast, whereas our users do. So like our users care, and they just like feel like this is great, but like, yeah, we don't really frankly like appeal to you, and that maybe be to our detriment as much, because we're so focused on making sure that the users, like the applications and then the users, are happy in one step down the line. But there's probably been, we're on like 2.1 now, we're about to go to 2.2, so there's been like 20 something pretty large releases that have it's hard for me to go even through like all of the changes. Some of them are certainly not small, and we could have branded them, we could have done whatever, but we're just looking for the next release. That's like just our culture, and we don't need to think. And there's I could start naming some stuff that we're working on that like we could call like a Solana 2.0 if we really wanted to, or like second client, multiple concurrent leaders, asynchronous block production. Like, these are all things that we're working on, and like they're sexy technologies in some ways, but at the end of the day, it's really about making sure the applications on top are set up for success. So there's also like tooling and other, read layer, RPC stuff that's just very functional, that is almost like even more our focus. So it's hard for us to just like, we're going to be judged on whether our users are happy and sticking around, not are we
100%.
drumming up some hype. Actually, I would, maybe this is like a little bit of an ethos thing. I think the like hyping up some sort of tech roadmap itself is a little bit detrimental. What you do is you get some like retail or other people to like get excited by or whatever, and then it takes a really long time to actually see that thing out, and by the time that it gets seen out, it's more like they're just franchise. What makes more sense is you just gradually increase the usability of the chain, and you get actual product market fit, and you just have this like stable growth of an ecosystem. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't seem to be more stable that way, but it's like but in open markets, but it still is way more stable from the like your users using the chain perspective. Like that's kind of what I was saying at the beginning, like I guess before the call. Like, meme coins just really haven't dropped off that much. Like, certainly a lot from like the peaks if you look at like Trump coin or whatever launch, but Solana is still used a lot today. Like, way year over year growth is insane. So yeah, there's that is more what we are like concentrated on.
It's kind of weird to market like some very deep tech advancement as well, because they're, a lot of users of Solana. You're right, like it's the end user application that matters the most. It's that feeling that you get of like a smooth UI UX experience, really.
Yeah, I remember 2 cycles ago, a lot of people were saying Solana was like a VC chain, and the irony here is that it's like the most retail friendly chain, and it's weird that it still sometimes carries that label. But you brought up a good point. I wanted to ask you, how has Solana been successful in explaining what they're doing? Like you said, a lot of it's like what you feel or what you interact with. But we had this conversation with a few other chains and founders as well. Like they struggle to translate, no matter how brilliant what they're building is, they struggle to explain why it's important and impactful instead of just demonstrating it. So, how has
Hmm.
Solana been successful in appealing to these more retail focused individuals and community? Like Solana just works, and it's not so easy to explain why it works to most people. But then we get back to, internet works, and most people don't know how the internet works. They just use it every day, Wi-Fi included. And so,
Yeah.
what's been the approach by Solana to like help educate people on why proof of history works, for example?
So I actually don't think we spend that much time talking about proof of history. I think that's one of the key differentiators from our messaging
Yeah,
from others. Like IBRL, there's very simple like just works type of messaging. I think the way you said it was honestly probably around where we would talk about it more than like uh, partly, but part of that is because we get our engineers away from talking about it. We like totally talks about it, who's clearly an engineer, but like he's still way more practical and like very well mannered and like just good vibes. That it's not as much as like this most of the time. Not as much as like nerdy spats around like the optimal thing. At least he's not in like we're not trying to like amplify that out into like to the masses. We try to lead how like our main customer in terms of messaging most of the time is actually developers. Like this is the type of application that you can build now. So something like Blinks appeals to them, or like, hey, we have this performance improvement, like stability is, like we talk about the outcomes to them, not like the underlying thing that gave, yeah, we rewrote the Quinn library and now the whatever top line condition. Like we don't talk about the underlying technical details a lot of times that they don't care. We care, oh, we actually can set your business up for success. Transactions are a hundredth of a penny. So there's I think that makes it way more clear why somebody would go on Solana. And then, frankly, like I think the last probably even a year and a half, maybe, you don't even really need to argue like a lot of those, as long as it just works. Like the ecosystem things are bigger selling points necessarily than like how many threads we have open at a given time. Like there's just not really a reason to go to that level of technical depth, even if we're also attracting researchers. Like we have multiple research teams, ETH Zurich, like Max Resnick, multiple people from Ethereum have come over, and so there is that like portion of like Solana Twitter. Again, Solana is a lot of things, but the appeal to just like any product, like you're selling the actual awesome feeling or other thing that you're going to give the user, and not just like some technical mumbo jumbo.
well said. Yeah, that's kind of the feeling I had. Like it's just simply there. Like you can use it. Like I think the first reason I used Solana was something exciting was launching on it, and then I downloaded Phantom Wallet. Phantom
Mm-hmm.
UX UI is amazing too, and that kind of helped onboard me to Solana as well.
Yeah.
So and I was like amazed at how fast it was compared to Ethereum at the time, and how congested it was, and how painful it was to use Ethereum. So that was kind of my onboarding experience, and I didn't need to know anything about how it worked. It just worked.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask real quick too, because you mentioned ghost chains, and one thing that Sasha and I are always constantly laughing about is how many chains are launching these days, especially like layer twos. And I think we even saw a few layer twos announcing that they want to build on Solana. And then there's like some EVM, SVM
Yep.
chain crossovers, so they kind of make these two building environments compatible. So I wanted to ask about that, and what's your opinion on all these chains launching? Because like there's perfectly good tech there already since last cycle, and we don't need a Solana killer, but everybody's obsessed with building a Solana killer right now, just like they're obsessed with the Ethereum killer.
Yeah. I mean, I think, man, I guess maybe my spicy take is that the tech narrative has kind of been
Yes.
there. And I think actually meme coins have kind of replaced the narrative driven thing. Like if you're going to, a lot of these chains are even like launching tokens before they even go live, or even both like more that like many of their core features are live. So they are essentially just like they're a narrative coin. So they are a meme coin. Even if there is like functionally something going to be there in the future, it is a story today. And I think that's part of the reason why people feel like meme coins have ruined the cycle, is because that narrative and like the investment into real things has moved into users having fun. And I think, or and speculating on things that do not have value. Like they don't even propose to have value outside of their mimetic, attention economy stuff. So the, uh, I just think the amount of L1s coming out, like you have to have a very compelling reason to serve whatever user you have, and you can point to like a gap. There's like this saying that a lot of these L1s should be features, not entirely new chains. And if all you are is just like some slightly better thing, you're probably not 10x better than the other chain, and you don't have an ecosystem.
Yeah.
You're not connected to stable coins. You're not connected to exchanges. You're like, there's all these like, and this goes for any other L1 that's looking to launch. Like it is an extreme, even if you just fork Ethereum, fork Solana or whatever, it is an extreme challenge to be usable, to be connected to all these things, because it's decentralized. You need all of them to like do it yourself and reform all those relationships and get those network effects. It's not a trivial thing. And even if, as you see, like even if you're like an L2 that's connected to an L1, those challenges still exist. It's not like you just, because you're connected to one, that it's all of a sudden just free. Like there's so that's actually one of the things that we're trying to work on in the Solana ecosystem, is that it is a little bit more connected. There are like native bridges and other things within L2s. We call them network extensions for multiple reasons, but this name is just going to be hard. It's basically anything that's attached to us. Like we want Solana actually to be super, at least I want Solana to be very connected to everything. Whether you call them L2s or, but there's also, on-ramp, off-ramps, bridges, just connect. Like if you want to be the center of commerce and be the trading hub, you want to be as connected in the lowest friction to anything. And whether it kind of looks like you or not, or whatever, and it's an L2, like that makes no difference to me. I want to be connected to it. So we've thought a lot about making sure that those connections are tight and like great, again, because we're making sure that users can use the things that are and interoperable and be better than the alternatives. So being better on the alternatives are, partly performance and stuff, but also just the connectivity and the liquidity between all of them. But again, I think you have to have a clear purpose on what broader problem you're solving that is 10x better than the existing solutions, to really go through the effort to launch a whole new chain.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is I mean, I love that, honestly. And it's funny because it ties back into like that ethos that you mentioned, that drives Solana. It's like the end user experience. And like at Arcanum, both Carmelo and I, we honestly believe that the future of this industry is rooted in interoperability and account abstraction. Like people don't give a shit about what blockchain they're using.
Yeah.
They just want like their lives to run smoothly, and they don't want like the power to go out. And that's really it. And it's interesting because like the blockchain wars and the polarization of community between different ecosystems has been really weird to witness. And it's like people are letting their emotional commitment be driven by like their financial investment into these ecosystems as well. And it's a really strange way at looking at technology development. And so hearing it from you is really cool because it's almost like neutralizing this argument a bit. And with that said, I wanted to ask you specifically what kind of partnerships or interoperability projects or developments between Solana and another ecosystem are you the most excited about right now?
What level of partnerships am I most excited about?
Yeah, just let's say, I mean, we talked about like the EVM, SVM bridging. We know that there's a lot of interoperability or like bridging between different networks. EVM aside, or maybe like L2s, L3 application chains and different networks. Like, what are some cool developments happening in your world on that side?
I'll use, maybe this is a bit of a stretch. I am really excited for the interactions with blockchain from the normal internet, that the normal internet doesn't need to change. They don't even need to know. There's a couple of examples off the top of my head. So Blinks, you mentioned, is one.
Yeah, Blinks.
We don't need Twitter's approval in order to get it. Now that has a product market fit. We're still trying to find it across stuff, but it is like that kind of thing. The other ones that are in development are ZK email, ZK TLS, and both of those are basically a way of taking normal signature structures that are happening or just normal formats and prove that something happened on the normal internet. You don't have to ask them. It's just their normal, already existing infrastructure that is telling you. And then you can do things on blockchain with the result. Whether that be like PayPal gives you an email confirmation, and then you use that to then pay it. I can prove that I paid, therefore I can unlock this escrow on the blockchain, something like that. I think that type of thing. Oh, and the other one that is passkeys. So being able to use existing like Face ID, Touch ID, whatever on your phone. Those actually do a secure signing in your phone itself. So you could potentially just have what are essentially native wallets on every device. And those are by definition like incredibly good user experiences that these major phone companies are baking into their design. And so it's that kind of thing is super sexy to me because it's partnering with people who like that's like the decentralization ethos is that you're just partnering with people because you have compatible tech. And so if Solana is like the shared space where people are just kind of interacting with us, this like we want to be as connected to the internet that's like doing really interesting things. And all of a sudden, I think in a couple of years, it just like you said, it's just users just want to have things work around them, and if they just are able to send emails and then all of a sudden just have everything be very liquid to anybody in the world, and then you don't have to worry about like downloading an application or whatever, and then like and they can use those funds across any site like that. You start having this very connected financial world around them that they just have all the power and they don't have to worry about like all these other little things. It just works, and they can do whatever commerce.
Yeah, that's the future. That's what we've been waiting for.
Mm-hmm.
Extreme account abstraction.
Another thing we wanted to cover, obviously there's too much to talk about, so we're going to have you back on, but we really wanted to ask about the phones because, you know, the first phone, I think it was the Saga, was like a pretty massive success. Also, people made some money with like the whole meme coin thing being tied into it, like Bonk, I think, which I don't know if that was part of the original strategy or if that was just like a throw-in that actually made it even more successful. But now I see that the Seeker that's coming out this summer has like 150,000 pre-orders, or I think that's correct.
So solve some international tariff issues. No big deal.
That's true. I didn't think about the implications of that, but I wanted to ask like how that ties into the strategy. And I have my theories like that might be helpful for onboarding more people into Web3 that maybe don't have computers, for example. But I think this move was kind of criticized when it was announced several years ago. And then ever since, like a nice debut, and the phones look great, and I kind of want one myself. And I want to ask you about it because who better to ask?
Yeah, the main thing here is more and more people are using mobile around the world for anything, financial, work, everything. And so having it that be more secure and user friendly, both. We can kind of get into it, but the kind of thing with passkeys, you can just have native things within the phone that you're just kind of signing and just using cryptography without even thinking about it. That opens up things. Clearly, it does because like that's what more and more where Samsung and Apple and all these other companies are moving. So the idea is just to do that with, but they're not like crypto native companies that are really pushing the needle on what's possible. So the idea is, okay, well, we'll give them the example. So maybe there'll be a phone company here long term, but the bigger thing is just all phone companies and all applications really start thinking about, oh, well, if I just want to monetize anybody in the world, or I want to have some shared ecosystem across their mobile and web, or my little ecosystem and some other ecosystem, maybe I should use blockchain to connect to those things. So that's like the design space that we're kind of like trying to open up with mobile. I think the other thing is there's 150,000 pre-orders. The development kit phones are already live. I kind of wasn't really joking about the tariff thing. Like that actually was very real, interesting thing development. I think the margins are enough that we'll probably be okay. It's by we, I mean like it's actually I'm not in the nuts and bolts of like all that. That is a completely separate company. Like Totally is actually the CEO of that company, but but what I see, like I saw him have a Twitter post about it, and it does seem like it's going to be a pretty big fiction. I think they'll probably be okay, or they have to like switch some things around. But yeah, so that's like the main thing in the next year. But the development kits are already out. That so hopefully, I think it's like this summer they should actually ship.
That's awesome. I didn't. What's the developer activity, by the way? Like, has there been a lot of demand for that, like to build applications for the phones themselves?
Yeah, so I'll give you like a really good example of something that's like low key different. So there's a company called Wind. And they make a I think it's grass token is the token, just
Yep.
spelled GRASS. And what they do is they allow you to put your IP address on an open market. And mobile phones have IPv4, so they're very valuable IP addresses. So you can basically just earn something. You can maybe natively just like earn something just by having your phone anyway. So you can kind of like help pay for your phone plan or whatever and earn grass like, while you do it. And there's other like data capture. So like Helium, for example, is a mobile phone company. You can get a free phone plan, and you can be kind of pinging. One of the things that you're providing them is like data when you ping proof of coverage, like do you actually have internet in this location, and you have like enough things just pinging that, then you can kind of have a certification that this area does actually have internet. Those kinds of things are great. Like the user doesn't even necessarily need to know. They just like download an application, then just get paid for the phone that they already have for doing things they would have done anyway. But it's like they're getting paid for a service that you're providing to these other applications, like you're actually giving. And so you're getting paid, so you kind of want to get paid, and you want to be able to pay somebody all around the world, and these are not huge margins. So you're doing micro payments. So having like a 30 cent plus whatever for a credit card, or like how else do you do like micro payouts? This is actually maybe a step back. Like one of the things that we are today in our financial system, even in like really well developed first world country, like really developed financial things, pay-ins are pretty easy. You have your Stripes and your API based payment systems. Payouts, on the other hand, are way harder. So pay-ins are you are just constrained by wherever the Stripe or whoever you accept. So there are some frictions there, but paying out, like, it's actually incredibly difficult, especially on like a micro scale. So that's why a lot of these deep in projects are starting to move to blockchain rails. And so when you have a phone and you can just like kind of connect to a lot of these things, a lot of them are about data capture and finding things roaming, maybe even like AR, like maybe take a picture, that type of application. In fact, like Niantic that made Pokemon Go, they sold off all of their IP and are just doing AR data capture on Edge through their
Wow.
like light spark or something. It's got some like silly little name, but they're entirely doing like AR mapping. So
Oh,
in through mobile. So it's like and I'm sure, and I've literally talked to them. I don't. This isn't some sort of like they've explored using, even a company to that scale has explored using blockchain because they have a hard time if they want to map the world, like just doing payouts to certain regions. So yeah, like this is what's like really shifted in maybe the last 2 years, is that like very real companies are really thinking about like, oh, I have this problem, this infrastructure seems to solve it. And so yeah, so to back up, like that's why we're doing mobiles, like showing everybody how to do this stuff. We're showing the Niantics of the world, like, oh yeah, you can do really easy payouts and payments in just on blockchain.
yeah, it's definitely helping make crypto and blockchain more legitimate in the eyes of most people, especially having like hardware and like an actual real tangible product you can hold in your hands. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's interesting that Niantic just, I think they sold Pokemon Go, but they
Yeah,
maintain
essentially
that
all their
under,
IP.
yeah, they
Yeah.
retained that, right?
Mhm.
It's wild. I think once you're red pilled on blockchain based payment infrastructure and remittance, it's very easy to look at this legacy system and say, what the hell are we still doing? What have we been doing for the past decade?
Yeah. The time value of money, I think, thing alone, just the T plus whatever for, international payments, T plus 4 usually for a lot of things. Like even Visa only, they do instant confirmations of your things, but they don't do the payouts until like they only do it once a day, 5 days a week, no holidays.
Mm.
And so if you're a business that needs to move money in and out really quickly, you have to wait like at least on average, 12 hours on average to get your payout. And blockchain's instant, and then you can do whatever else you're going to do. So I think it kind of opens up like a lot of like micro payments thing, and credit cards are 30 cent minimum. That just makes it so you just cannot do certain payment based
Yeah.
businesses, and that's 2% on top of that too, which is also another thing that if you're going to go on the high end, you can't do on credit cards. You need a lot of those require bank transfers. So like there's a clear both on the very very micro and the very large that like blockchain rails are just much better and faster. So I think that's kind of, especially like, I'm glad that we didn't spend the entire time talking about tariffs, but if you're entering a world where there's like a little bit less trust in the financial system and especially like international like collaboration between people, like obviously all these businesses still want to work together. Wouldn't it be great if there was rails that you were just said you didn't have to trust the financial systems quite as much, and you just knew things were going to, execute in a certain way? I mean, that's through code. Like, that's blockchain, and so I think you're feeling some short-term pain right now as an industry, and just like all tech is basically feeling this, as there's so much uncertainty, but the opportunity is way more, and regulations are clearing up and all these other things. So this is the time for people, and I know this is like always like a bear thing where you're like, oh, now is the time or whatever, but like I actually really can't think of a better time where you have clarity on how to operate. All the SEC that lawsuits that I know have been dropped. Like there's clarity around you can operate a stablecoins business, you can operate payments business. There's like a set of things where you just very clearly can operate now. And I think that's really awesome. I think that's where we need to be. Just take that and keep building those businesses.
It is very exciting. I think there's a lot of developments happening on all fronts, but I think I hope that you guys end up figuring out these tariff complications, because I might be in the market for a new phone soon.
Nice.
This sounds kind of exciting. Well, Matt, we've got to wrap it up. Unfortunately, we're going to ask one last question. I'm going to hand it over to my esteemed colleague Carmelo to do so. But before we do, I'd like to personally thank you again for coming on board. I'd like to thank all of our audience members and all of our viewers for watching. If you're enjoying this content, make sure you tap that like button. And if you stick around, we've got some more fun Boom Room interviews coming, some fun investor eye tests. So make sure you subscribe. And with that said, Carmelo, take it away, man.
Oh, you forgot to say, check out all the links, the relevant links, and we'll drop like links to the article you mentioned, Matt, and some other cool stuff that Solana is working on. And we close out every interview just by asking what you're most excited about, what you're most bullish on in the next 12 months. And obviously, it can't be Solana. It has to be something else, just for the sake of being interesting. So it could be like an industry, because we didn't get enough time to touch on, like, I think you mentioned DPIN and RWAs, or specific projects that are probably building on Solana, because there's obviously quite a few really cool ones that are building in your ecosystem. So it could be anything.
I mean, I think it's just the time that I've spent talking about various things. I think I'm most interested in diverse industries interacting with each other, in using as collateral or whatever, just payment rails and other things so that I think is the most interesting design space for me. But then I think maybe a little bit more granularly, I think there's a lot of things that people do that are valuable, but it's just really hard to form a business around them today. And a lot of them are like, I mentioned the information gathering. You're starting to see with like even like energy systems, gathering energy, selling energy to our grid. Like there's a bunch of little things that I think we could do. And like DPIN is like very much in that design space of, if you have more efficient infrastructure, you can do payouts much easier. What businesses can arise from that? And so I'm really excited for some of these like DPIN and other projects to really start flourishing in the next year. And you're already seeing it today. A lot of them are having like the initial stages of kind of like hockey stick growth.
Yeah, we've invested in some companies building in Solana as well, and there's a lot to be excited about. And we were doing research for this interview. I found, I think it was like time.fun, and it was like tokenized time, and that was also a really cool development. And I saw that it was a concept that Sasha and I have been toying with and thinking about for a few years, and then we saw it like flawlessly. I mean, obviously there's going to be some pain points and growing pains, but really cool concept, and one example of like the potential of blockchain, like you said, to kind of build a business around something that before wasn't possible.
Yep, because now they can do any creator in the world micro payouts, whereas like the others, like even the Patreons of the world, they usually only accept creators from certain locations, and They can only accept certain payment sizes or whatever, but you can do like a quarter tip, like literally like 25-cent tip. And so and the other thing is like because it's much easier to have like a marketplace or whatever, you can kind of buy into a creator early, and then if a bunch of other people really like that creator, then your interactions with them are like cheaper because you have a token that like has risen in value. So like you kind of like invested in them is kind of the wrong word, but like you've basically said like, oh, I'm excited to interact with you. I can purchase this much and I get to enter some chats or whatever. And then over time, if other people do that, like you have more like relative stake in the network. So it's kind of cool, kind of gamifying a lot of these fan engagement things in a very functional way. Cause like the redemption value of these things isn't just a meme coin. It's you get to DM them, you get to, whatever else the creator, like exposes to their ecosystem. And I don't know. And you even saw the other day Amaranth signed up. She's a very savvy, not like for anybody stuff, but she's very very savvy businesswoman. Has been like in the forefront of a lot of those kind of creator trends. And so we'll see how she engages with it and enjoys it or whatever. But I expect if she does like it, you'll see a lot of other creators, because she's very much a leader in that space, and people look to her for what she's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of that adoption comes from the most unlikely places, but that's blockchain.
Yeah. Take that, banks. Solana's here to take over. Well, Matt Sorg, Vice President of Technology at Solana Foundation, thank you again so much for taking the time to come on. This has been really exciting. And I think Carmelo and I are very bullish on a lot of the technological advancements that are coming down the pipeline for Solana, as far as throughput increases and improvements, account abstraction, and everything else. Again, I'd like to thank all of our viewers for tuning in. Again, tap that like button, throw us a follow. If you're interested in what Matt's doing and learning more about Solana Foundation, of course, everyone knows Solana, but if you want to learn more, there's going to be some links in the show notes, so click them there. And Matt, once again, thanks so much for coming on.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. Take care, man.
Yep,
Take
bye-bye.
care, everybody. Yeah.